video form is actually pretty much in its infancy, or at least its tablet. These pieces I know are very personal for Marjan, so without further ado, Marjan.
Okay, I have two pieces here from my Of Revolution series, which is actually about revolutions as the political phenomenon and also as a personal transformational process. And so in both of these pieces, I'm dealing with some of the political dynamics in our world today, but I'm also recalling my memories of living through the 1979 Islamic revolution in Iran. In this piece, which is shot in, this piece, which is David and Goliath, I'm sort of taking the archetype of, the underdog overthrowing the giant of corporatism in this instance to make a commentary about this sort of standoff we actually have right now. There are slogans from the Occupy Wall Street movement in this. I was part of the original Occupy Wall Street art show this time a year ago at JP Morgan building. There is actually a Guy Fawkes mask embedded in here that somebody actually saw. There's tons of text throughout this piece, and the way I designed the text is it's up to you how deep you want to get into it. These pieces are kind of like cinematic, illuminated manuscripts, and some people will just read a couple of the blurbs and move on, and I've seen other people who spend inordinately large amounts of time just reading all the text throughout the piece. There's also stories about my experiences in the revolution, and I just thought I'd mention this is actually the sine wave as a graphic embellishment of the chants of Allahu Akbar from the Green Movement in Iran in 2009. Allahu Akbar means God is great, and it's usually a religious recitation or incantation, but in the Middle East it's oftentimes enough a protest slogan. And the reason for that is because the idea is when faced with oppressors, invaders, and those who would harm you, you invoke various names of God. And that's why this is such a popular political slogan. I think another thing that happens in this piece for me is that I also sort of take this whole revolutionary energy and including the experience of living through it, and also use it to examine other transformational things here. Here I describe the first time I saw Jackson Pollock paintings when I arrived in New York City, and I talk about, it's one thing to read this work is revolutionary in a textbook, and then you stand in front of it and the air changes. So to me, it's all about the sort of transformation that happens. And then there's, of course, stories of me collecting bullets on the roof with my younger brother to see what side was fighting who in 1979 in Iran. Because M16s meant it was the Shah's army, and Kalashnikovs meant it was the revolutionaries. And my older brother taught me to figure that out and tell the difference between the shell cases. This piece is a little bit different. It's called Shot in Iran, and the basic premise for it, and as you can see, there's this piece has a lot more narrative content in it, so the text here is quite involved. And I've seen actually people who really get into reading it. This is a traumatic experience that I had in Iran watching a senseless massacre of soldiers in 1979. And I used that experience as starting off point to really explore this experience of being a political refugee in New York City. And this city is full of so many political refugees, and I feel like for the last 3 years that I've been here, I've talked to so many cab drivers, people at delis, people in restaurants, people on the street who come from all over the world, who've lived through some of the most horrifically traumatic things imaginable. And they usually never talk about these stories unless they realize you're like them. And then out comes all these stories. I mean, I've spent hours literally talking to people from Somalia, people from Ethiopia, people from South America, people from Asia, just telling me all these stories. So this really becomes a story of, trying to live with these wounds and these scars. And I even have poetry from Rumi and Hafez here. Rumi talks about the wound is where the light enters us. And then the story really sort of evolves into other personal traumas in my life, and then the whole thing becomes the story of forgiveness and transcendence. And the unusual part of this is when I first came to this church, And Michael told me this was the wall that I had. I had already done this piece, and I was so amazed that I ended up on either side of a crucifix, because this is really a story of forgiveness and transcendence. And to me, it was one of those, one of those there are no mistakes and no coincidences. Somehow the curatorial synchronicity here made perfect sense instead of putting these pieces here. I should also mention that somebody kept asking me, what is this? That's ish, which means love in Persian. And some of the calligraphy here is Persian. Some of them are political graffiti from Iran. Some are actual calligraphy of Rumi and Hafez Sufi poetry. And there's also personal handwriting in Persian throughout these pieces too. By the way, both of these pieces are done using 3D modeling and rendering. I modeled these characters. They use motion capture of contemporary dance for the posing of the figures and digital painting, and their output as archival digital C-prints. And this one is also an animation called David Goliath Can't Fight, which is a separate piece.
So let's open it up for questions for Marjan. Anyone have some questions?
Is there a reason that you're using like transformers instead of, like, they're going through human feelings and emotions, and the fact that these are transformers and pretty much usually they're programmed to do something. What was behind that, the reason of using them for that? I mean, that's one idea I come up to.
No, that's a good question, because somebody actually came up to me and said, are you using transformers because they're stories of transformation? and I actually laughed. That wasn't my original intent, but I could definitely see that. I think one of the reasons that I was using transformers is that I'm a long-standing sort of digital artist since the 80s. Actually, I've been doing computer graphics. I've worked heavily in the commercial end of the industry. So this is an aesthetic that I employ, and this is an aesthetic that I use quite heavily. That's not necessarily the only reason why I used it. When I first conceived of these pieces, I wanted to abstract the figure in a way that didn't involve race or ethnicity. And that's when I came up with the idea of abstracting them in these sort of geometric and machined ways. Because this was, to me, really about this technological state and this technological way of examining everything. I mean, when you think about it, most people are looking at the sort of global uprising that we have through technology. None of us are standing there in person witnessing it, and most of the stuff you're seeing on YouTube or on the web already has all this artifacting of the technology in it. So we're really looking at all of these events through a technologically abstracted and distorted lens as it is. This is just exaggerating it stylistically and artistically.
One last question, anyone? Thank you, Marjan.